Good morning, everyone. Hello, I'm Santiago Arranz. I'm part of the Cloud Competence Center in Santander Global Technologies. We are pleased to introduce today Henri van der Bulk, who is Chief Technical Advisor at Santander. Henri, are you with us here?
Yeah, I'm here. How are you doing, Santiago? Thank you for having me.
Very good. Thank you. So we are very grateful to have, happy to have you here. It's a great pleasure to have you with us to deliver this tremendous presentation. Just so everybody knows, Henri is a proven technology executive and enterprise architect, focused on delivering solutions that focus on learned principles that drive business outcomes. He has a broad experience in all the verticals: oil and gas, energy and marketing, trading, financial trading, system engineering, and government. His experience helped him to have and discover and apply patterns across all the verticals. So, Henri, if you want, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, Santiago, thank you so much. Buenos dias, good morning, good morning, buongiorno, bonjour, good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you here today, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. So let me kind of start off with this. Have you ever wondered why rockets don't go straight up? Well, if a rocket just flew straight up, then it would fall right back down to Earth when it ran out of fuel. Its mass and gravitational pull require a significant amount of fuel to achieve the escape velocity. So by changing the trajectory, you actually save fuel and energy. Now, I worked at NASA for about 4 years, which was an amazing experience. But I would not call myself a rocket scientist by any means. But I wanted to use this as an analogy because when you think about transformation, is the weight of your organization, and not just your company. It's really the processes, your heritage core banking systems will require more fuel, and your culture is your gravity that's pulling you down to really achieve the outcomes of your transformation. So to really achieve escape velocity, you must use your fuel, your resources wisely and create a curved trajectory. So let's kind of dive into this concept a little bit more. So the pandemic has really driven a massive amount of digital transformation, and many organizations have been trying to transform. However, digital laggers were left behind when this pandemic happened because they were spending all their resources, their fuel, on the existing estate that they have. While leaders who focus on building customer-centric experiences have flourished in this economy, they were able to leave the gravitational pull behind and achieve escape velocity. Now, banking and financial services are highly industrialized organizations with lots of regulation and of heritage core banking. But just like companies like SpaceX, Blue Origin, Virgin were able to transform their industry. And during the time at NASA, I actually saw this happening of how we switched from system engineering to more agile practices. So as they saw something that was possible, so can you as organizations. But let's not get ahead of ourselves and too far out in space and talk about astrophysics, which is a great subject, but let's get us back down to Earth, talk about transformation. So now looking at these boats that are practicing safe distancing in this harbor, I came across this Dutch word the other day. I'm originally from the Netherlands, so it intrigued me to see all this invention of brand new worlds, and hopefully they win the Euro 2020 as well, which obviously I believe. But the word describes something very interesting in the change in economy. On the half-meter economy, or 6 feet economy, is really an economy that practices safe distances and is able to flourish based on those things, which really means all those parts of the economy that can keep going while maintaining distance, such as home delivery. Even as the economies have changed throughout our stay at home and making pandemic purchases, most of us probably regret by this time of the things that we purchased. Let's not forget those that have been in front lines and the small businesses that really are making up the large part of the economy. At least specifically in the United States, small business companies are making up the majority of the economy. So I was actually excited to start seeing that small businesses, like this one diner I was at in Lake Tahoe this over the weekend, they're coming back to business, which is so great and so encouraging to see in the economy. And they were able to do this through financial services companies that played a significant role. So in the United States, there was a program that got created, the PPP program, or Payroll Protection Program, was really a motion for small businesses to obtain loans so that they could pay their employees. This is similar to the German short work scheme and a couple of other ones that exist in Europe. The US version was primarily to provide loans versus paying directly for wages. But companies like Fiserv helped thousands of financial institutions process $4.1 billion of US dollars in PPP loans for tens and thousands of small businesses. Now, they were able to do this, delivering 430 releases in 28 days. Now, think about that for a minute. That's 25 releases per day that they were able to do. Now, without the access to these loans, most of these small businesses, again, like a diner like this, would not have been able to stay in business or pay their employees. So what allowed companies like Fiserv to transform overnight and achieve escape velocity in such a short amount of time? Now, I want you to hold on to that question because I'll go back to that. But let's first try to reflect a little bit of what history has kind of told us here. So financial services organizations are no stranger to disruption in turbulent times. We saw the financial downturn in 2008 that hit the industry pretty hard. They have survived economic downturns. Natural disasters like Hurricane Sandy has flooded Wall Street. And now the pandemic. All of these are kind of described are existential crises that these companies have gone through. And unfortunately, we've seen a lot of companies disappear during those crises. Those were the ones that weren't able to transform in time. So subsequently, what we're seeing is home initiatives around the world having significantly altered the way we work moving forward. And according to Gartner, really, we're projecting that 50% of financial services employees will be remote by 2024. Now, we'll see a very different distribution across the world, but it is a reality that more and more people will start working from home. Now, the other thing we saw is a huge shift in customer behavior. We could no longer walk into a bank branch, sign a piece of paper, or open an account and deposit money into it. They weren't available. So there was a huge shift to online services, digital transactions. Now, Chase Banking did a study of their customers that showed 80% of their consumers prefer to manage their finances digitally. That shows the shift that has happened, the disruption that is going on. Now, combined with that, we see a fierce competition for the online consumer. Think about it, like all those companies that were already in the digital age had the access to those consumers. So in banking, we really see fintech companies, challenger banks, organizations that were born in the cloud that are capturing the market share and able to provide seamless customer experiences. Think about Apple Pay, Google Pay, Alipay, all these online services. I mean, for all intents and purposes, you can now open up savings and bank accounts through Google, which is just amazing to see. They already have captured that market share. And finally, what we should not forget is the alarming rate of cybersecurity attacks in the FinServ organizations. As a matter of fact, over half of all those attacks were during COVID-19. And staying at home orders just made it harder to address these things. So we need to do things differently to really address this disruption, the existential crises that are happening. But we don't want to just always react. We actually want to create an adoption where we can continuously transform. Think of it as a flywheel of transformation. Now, most of these transformations that have happened, and through some of our research, is they're leading the digital transformation. But we have no luxury anymore for months of long planning cycles anymore. Those days are gone. We need to be able to act now, react to market conditions, and able to continuously adopt. And it needs to be agile to a certain extent. Now, according to this study, we actually see that 3/4 of all FS companies that we surveyed, they had digital transformation plans in place. and they were putting in place an existential crisis, but they saw them accelerate. But first, before we just talk about transformation, what you have to be clear about is, why are you trying to transform? We know some of the pieces, but what does it mean in the banking industry? Why you specifically need to transform? You've got to focus on outcomes. Like, what are you trying? Why are you doing this? So let's look at a couple of examples. Here's a couple of desired outcomes that we see banks are trying to do. First, financial services feel pressure to provide compelling digital experiences, as I just described, to the consumers. And it's really to help order grow revenues. And they need to reduce the time it takes to convert an idea into software in production that impacts the business. Now, we also see the return on equity in the financial services steadily dropping over time. Now, some digital laggards focus on primarily cutting costs to get their returns on equity. But by creating compelling experiences, we'll actually increase the assets. It will maintain your customers and get new customers, just like what the fintech companies are doing. Now, they also rapidly want to iterate over that code and learn from your customers. Approximately 40% of the consumers these days that leverage fintech platforms for daily financial transactions, and more than 90% of those people who do so are satisfied with those experiences. This sets the precedence for banking. Now, managing this growth of software vulnerabilities, we still need to maintain trust. We need to maintain trust in the system. So you have to innovate at a pace and a scale while protecting your application estate. Now, finally, the other key outcome is financial services want to take full advantages of the innovation that's happening. There's amazing innovation. Think about touchless payments, different payment mechanisms, wealth management that is happening. But you don't have to be the one inventing everything. You can actually leverage the innovation that's happening, and through partnership and incorporating ecosystem capabilities. So just a quick summarize as well, what leaders have agreed on is these two main motions. Like modernizing your application portfolio, your core banking heritage systems, thus improve customer experiences. The days of waiting for something to happen are over. It needs to be instant. Also, improving customer experience is also tied directly to revenue growth. Time and time we've seen this as well. Experiences create more revenue. It's not just about cost cutting. So we've talked a little bit about the experiences. So what are some of the experiences that we see in the environment? You really want to focus on these three different elements. Is you want to meet new and existing customers where they bank, which happens to be a lot of times their mobile phone, right? Or take care of the existing customers and maintain their trust and loyalty. And loyalty really creates a network effect of your customers. And accelerate your time to market to meet your customer demand. So you want to get away from the drag. And in the end, that really creates all these different experiences, like mobile banking, digital payments, digital lending, all these new capabilities that customers just expect you to have. But as we talk about this, what are some really things that are impede us to get these digital experiences? Because it's not as simple as we just keep saying about transformation. There are fundamental things that really help, that impede in these things. I think first and foremost, what we're seeing is heritage systems of core banking that are classically set in very industrial ways. And not just your systems, it's also your processes. That your processes are heritage in the way that they were done. They don't act fast enough. But part of this is also the key misalignment that happens in organizations. Is the misalignment of outcomes. One part of an organization is not aligned with the other part of the organization. And you really want to have them gravitate towards key outcomes you want to achieve. Is it additional revenue? Is it reducing cost? Is it creating better experiences? What are those things for your organization? Security and compliance continues to be important, but has compliance been built into your modern applications and services? Are your processes still in an heritage way? So who wants another change ticket or a massive architectural review board you have to go through? We want to get to a point where we assume positive intent, build compliance and security into your pipelines. Think about some of the DevSecOps motions, secure supply chains, where you create flow while still maintaining security and compliance. So the days of manually checking things are really impeding us in getting to this point. Last but not least, we see a very slow time to market. Think about like, how fast are you able to make a change to your core banking system? How long does that take? How long does it change tickets? How does the review come in? So these are some key impediments that we've seen. But the other thing that we've seen, and I wanted to share this with you, some learnings of fallacies that we see on how certain companies think about the core banking transformation. So let's dive into many of them. So many digital laggers use digital transformation as a lipstick approach. They're looking to put it on existing heritage systems and approaches. It's really a veneer that has created a disjointed of experiences and not the outcomes that you really want for your transformation. So think about this, where you see your user interface looks fantastic. It's beautiful what you've created. But you know what? You can't use it during a mainframe patch window. The weekend, you can't use it. So does it really transform? Or you submit a loan application through this whiz-bang interface, fantastic. But then you get an email that says, well, somebody will be back in touch with you for your application. And these are real things. I mean, I've seen this with many organizations that try to create this lipstick approach. Or you've made this pandemic purchase of Kubernetes during the pandemic. It looks fantastic. But now what? What outcomes are you trying to drive it? What are you really changing? So these digital laggers, they don't really transform, and they look at shiny objects to create short-term benefits. And they continue to have inertia. And this is what I've been calling the lipstick transformation. Now, you can turn it into a great business like Louis Vuitton, but you have luxury products, but it doesn't transform your financial services company. So let's take a look at a couple of other examples. So another lipstick service that we see a lot of times is this quick point solution that says, hey, I've moved to the cloud. I've got the cloud stood up. But wait, all my heritage systems are still in the data center. And I need 3-week lead time to get access to my cloud services. It doesn't get the developer experiences or the developer velocity in doing that. You're still having a lot of drag that exists in the organization. Now, don't get me wrong. Moving to the cloud has key benefits around elasticity, variable cost models. But if your core banking is still on-prem, you haven't really moved the needle as much. You might create your user interfaces there or some of the capabilities, but you still need to address the core banking side. The other thing that we see is quickly jumping to solution of patchworks where, and I realize this is a DevOps day, so apologies, and please go with me, is DevOps is actually used a lot of times as like, this is the solution to transform. Now, DevOps has really good qualities, but if the rest of your organization doesn't align with the philosophy and the approaches, you can't really leverage that capability. So let's now understand a little bit more. What are the forces that are really going on in an organization to transform your organization? So let's go back to our analogy of escape velocity. So the real transformation, you need to recognize these specific forces that are happening. To generate velocity, you must overcome these elements. First and foremost, mass. This is your whole estate, your alignment, your processes, your architecture, your resources, the technical depth that you have. That's the mass that's been pulled down by the gravity of your organization. And again, that gravity is your culture of how you approach it. More on that here in a minute. And so the more weight that you have, the more thrust and fuel you need to use, the more resources. This is your inertia, the entropy in the organization you have to overcome. And it really prevents you from achieving that velocity. And without recognizing that, you cannot escape that as well. The other key force is the drag. This is your resistance inside of your organization that is preventing you from moving forward. So how do we address this? We can move to another planet. That's one option. We have different gravity, and that might solve your problem. But that doesn't solve the problem you have down on Earth. So let's dive a little bit deeper on these things. So first, is one of the key reasons on the cultural side that I keep bringing this up is that too many organizations have this notion, why fix it if it isn't broken? They don't see the customers, they don't have the empathy of the customers in mind. And this is actually very well described by Larman's Law of Organizational Behavior by Craig Larman. And he kind of describes it as organizations implicitly are optimized to avoid change. They want to maintain the status quo. And it's really by the middle, first level management, specialist positions, architects to a certain extent that have power structures. And the reason this actually happens is because their incentives are not aligned with the outcomes that the organization is trying to achieve with that transformation. So maybe a show of hands, have you guys seen this before? You see the organization is not wanting to move because the incentives are not correct. We're too busy with certain things we're working on. So let's get back to transformation, because I want to be clear on what we really mean by transformation. So coming back to the MIT study, they also define this very well and crisp, is that it's really about incorporating modern technology to the organization processes and strategy to achieve business goals or outcomes. Those outcomes are customer outcomes. The key thing is not just technology. Technology for the sake of technology doesn't get you transformed, as I've been telling, but it is about setting key, clear outcomes. That's what helps you transform. Now, we've been thinking about this quite a bit and looking at what are the capabilities that a company needs, a core banking organization needs to becoming a digital leader. And what we've boiled it down to a couple of key capabilities that we have. First and foremost is you need to have a capability of aligning the organization. Existential crisis creates focus. Alignment around outcome creates focus in an organization. Next, you need to have architectures, platforms that allow you to create flow in the organization, allow you to continuously refactor, continuously allow you to achieve these outcomes. But you also need to have a way to have tech adoption, not just tech for the sake of tech, but if you have a certain problem domain or new outcomes that you're trying to achieve, how quickly can you adopt new technology? How quickly can you get rid of existing technology? And all this needs to be done in an intrinsic security way. How do you bake security into your pipelines? How do you make it part of your processes? Not an after fact or not a gate that I have to go through to make it into production. Those days should be changed. Last, cost as well. And I'm not saying manage cost. I'm just saying that make it visible of what are the implications of certain decisions that you make. Does a developer know in your organization right now that when they deploy something, what is the cost implication to the organization? We're not trying to do bean counting here. It's really creating visibility in what the implications are of doing them. But one thing I don't want to forget, I come back to this as culture. Your culture is essential for really becoming a digital leader. Do you have a venture capitalist or a startup mentality that allows you to achieve velocity? So I mentioned existential crisis a couple of times, and I want to dive into this a little bit more because the pandemic was one of those existential crises where organizations created focus. Now, the one thing I hear a lot of times, and the PPP program at Fiserv and some of the other large financial institutions that I get the pleasure to working with, every team member that I've interviewed, I get this feedback that says teams actually love it when they're in an existential crisis because they love the focus it creates, the collaboration it creates. All the other noise is removed from them because the whole organization is focused on dealing with the existential crisis. Now, it's not a healthy thing to continuously focus on crisis. You don't want crisis that everything is on fire. But as my dear colleague Cote has indicated in one of his books, there's this notion of a decadence vortex that happens with existential crises. A crisis happens, we fix something, we change something, we transform something, we declare success, but then we go back to decadence, where we're so used to what's there, and we're just waiting for the next crisis. So that's not a model that's sustainable over time. You want to be able to constantly have existential crisis that gives you focus, but not create the decadent insights. So let's kind of look at a model on how we can actually create this in an organization. And really what you want in an organization is to create a learning organization. So existential crisis gives you focus, team bonding, right? But you want your team to be able to go through this motion where they continuously create hypotheses of what they think might happen, build solutions, build products, but measure these as well. And continuously seeing, are you moving the needle? Am I getting closer to my outcomes that I've set in my hypotheses? And constantly asking, what are we learning from this? Are we moving the needle? Is this transformation working, right? This might not be working. Are you able to pivot at any point in time and redo your learning? But first and foremost, it's in the center of this as well, is you need to have alignment where you create outcomes and use frameworks like OGSM, OKR. Doesn't really matter what framework you use. The key thing is are you articulating your outcomes? But it also leads to like creating this learning organization where everybody's constantly learning from things versus dealing with crises. It is also important to recognize the leadership that is necessary for core banking. That we've been so used in core banking to having a top-down hierarchy approach to leadership. And I think leadership has to really transform first and foremost to really get your core banking benefits. Because how do you change your processes and your technology at the same time? You need to have clear leadership focus. And this is kind of interesting I took this from the Harvard Business Review, and it really applies very well to how you should think about your leadership transformation. You want to create a tolerance for failure. This is interesting because I always look back and during my apprenticeship days, I had a lot of failures. And I will tell you that failures create a lot of learning. Because anytime you look at things, if you're successful continuously, are you really learning? I mean, the best soccer players constantly train. They constantly reflect back on where have I failed? Where do I learn constantly? I mean, practice makes perfect, but practice is really about embracing failure as well. And so don't use the failure as a negative context. It's as a positive side. But leadership has to embrace this. Like, are you coming down on people when something happens? Or are you really embracing it to understand what you're learning? But also create a learning of experimentation. Banking and financial institutions are very challenged a lot of times in that. They create a year-long financial plan. We set projects, we capitalize our projects, and we don't willing to experiment because we're trying to achieve the projects. And that creates a tension because if your outcome is to complete the project, the whole market might have changed. Like, take a look at last year. Did all the projects that you created, did they get finished? Well, if you finish your projects, but the pandemic had it, you are now out of business. So you need to have a way to experiment throughout the year to see what works, what doesn't work. Fundamentally, what your teams need is a notion of psychological safety. And I don't mean sympathy for the people. It's creating an environment that people feel like they can be heard, you can be empathetic to their needs. They feel like they can speak up at any point in time. Like, test yourself in your organization. Can anybody at any point in time speak up and voice their opinion? And what do we do with that? Do we recognize that? How do we build consensus? Now, collaboration is critical. As we all know, we're here at DevOps, so it's already about collaboration between development and operations. And what's interesting about collaboration, and this is what I miss about Dynamics, being able to go to conferences, meeting people in person. I would love to be there in person with you. Is collaboration that happens when people come together. It creates innovation. So getting back to creating collaborative environments, physical, virtually, however you want to do this. It's important when people have time to collaborate together. This might mean pairing. I'm a big fan of pairing. So pairing between developers, are they able to do this? But again, leadership has to create vision and direction. Leadership should not tell us how to do things, but they should be able to articulate what and why into clear outcomes. And this what and why is important because that creates the focus. Now, to reach this point, I'm kind of giving you a couple of different pointers of how to transform. And these are critical in core banking because classically we're not used to doing these things in this way. So leadership has to really embrace this doing. And again, it's not about technology. But let me give you a little bit of a journey that I've seen with large financial institutions that I've been able to go through to actually really transform. And again, just like with your trajectory for rockets, it doesn't happen straight up. It is really a curved trajectory. But when you reach that velocity, that's when you know you've really been able to escape the gravitational pulls. So let's take a look. The first thing that you want to do is chart a course that is around the existential crisis. Again, don't create a crisis, but create that focus and describe the outcomes so that teams can focus. Next, you'll want to move as quickly as possible. So this is by identifying and quickly moving applications that are key to a platform that allows you to embrace cloud native. It can help you create flow in your organization. You don't have to submit tickets to get yet another virtual machine, a network switch, etc. You want to remove that burden. But the key thing is moving the applications, not just refactoring at this point. The next thing you want to then modernize. Now, this is really looking at your portfolio of identifying critical business monoliths and systems that are inconsistent into more cloud native applications. It doesn't mean totally refactoring the application. It has to have a lean approach. Create slices in your architecture so that you really can address this in a lean way. But also you should ask yourself the question, is this heritage system that I have, this monolith that I have, is it differentiating in my business? If not, can I use a fintech company? Can I use an ecosystem provider that can give me this capability without me have to spend the resources on maintaining something like that? Next, what really starts scaling up in your organization and really builds up velocity is organizing your teams around common outcomes and building lean governance. And really what this means is looking at your portfolio, products, defining products, and then going through and are you creating the learning exercises? What you then will notice is then when you really start taking off is maximizing your success by doing health checks. Are you addressing problems? What are you learning from these things? How are you pivoting in your organization? And this really journey is very common that we see for organizations that I get involved in. And I get really passionate about this because it's amazing when you're able to get to 15 releases a day and constantly creating value for your customers. Now, I've talked a lot about the journey. Let me kind of come back and summarize this in a couple of different ways. So, how are we overcoming the aerodynamic forces in your organization? Well, you really, again, want to achieve the state velocity. I think first, to get thrust, you need to have product teams that are self-enabled. They can make their own decisions while they're still focusing on outcomes. And one of the key outcomes is to create flow in your organization. Can a developer have a clear path to production that continuously can make updates? Yes, you can do this in a compliant and secure way. We've done it. But also you need to leverage platforms that allow you to create flow. You don't have to submit tickets. Developer can do this themselves, right? While operations can focus on day-to operations and scaling things out as they see fit for apply SRE practices, for example. How do I address the mass? Well, mass is addressed by really creating lean approaches. You don't have to take the whole organization with you. You can create slices in your core banking, right? So modernize the slices that are important. Think about your customers, building empathy. How do we overcome drag? Remember, the drag is really what is holding you back as an organization. It's the ones that hold back your company. The way to do this is really establishing learning organizations that explore hypotheses and constantly run experiments. That doesn't give an opportunity for the existing company to really hold you back, because you're constantly learning, you're constantly creating these hypotheses. And how do you create lift? Well, leadership provides this vision, focus for articulating clear outcomes. So I want to leave you with this. It is possible. Think about what the possibility is to transform. Keep these aerodynamic forces in focus. These are the ways that you can allow to move forward. So with that, I'll summarize it in this: to really deliver financial services in a modernized way, you're able to do this. And hopefully this talk has kind of given you the background and key details to doing this. I thank you very much. Hopefully you enjoy the rest of the conference. I'll be hanging out for a little while.
Thank you very much, Henri. Really good presentation. I would like to point that how can we avoid being slow into the market is a huge thing. And I think that is very important, the path that we can follow in order to achieve that. Thank you very much. Extremely good presentation.
Thank you.